All right, so we're diving straight into the deep end of the cybersecurity pool today. No floaties, no time for small talk. We're going deep on the biggest security events of the second half of 2024.
You said it. It was a wild 6 months. Buckle up.
Yeah, seriously. Let's rewind to July. Starting off, boom, global IT outage. And the culprit, a wonky CrowdStrike update. 8.5 million Windows systems worldwide just stopped.
Talk about a domino effect. Airlines, hospitals, banks, everything grinding to a halt. And the craziest part is, it wasn't some fancy zero-day exploit or a nation-state actor, just a messed up signature file in a routine update.
And Delta Airlines, they weren't messing around. Hit CrowdStrike and Microsoft with lawsuits totaling at least, what, $500 million? But it raises a question, right? When software goes haywire like that, who's really holding the bag? The vendor, the user. It's a tough one.
It really is, and it's a question we're going to be grappling with more and more as we depend even more on software. This whole CrowdStrike thing, it could be a turning point in how we think about cybersecurity, like who's responsible when things go wrong.
And right on the heels of that outage, we had the RockU 2024 password leak. 10 billion passwords, plain text, just dumped online, like a digital graveyard of terrible password habits.
Yeah, I mean, how many people out there are still using the same password for everything? Or maybe just slightly tweaking it, which, let's be honest, isn't much better. This leak was a huge wake-up call. Password managers, two-factor authentication, those aren't optional anymore.
Absolutely. Speaking of bad actors, the Lockbit ransomware crew, they upped their game this year. They hit a major fintech company, which to me says they're not just going after the low-hanging fruit anymore.
Oh yeah, they're getting bolder. They're not just encrypting files anymore either. They're stealing the data first, then hitting you with the ransomware, and then if you don't pay, they threaten to leak everything. It's double the pressure.
Nasty. And then there was Evolve Bank and Trust. They had a rough July with their data breach.
Yeah.
Big clients like Affirm and Wise were affected. It really highlights the risks when you're sharing data with third parties.
You could have Fort Knox level security in your own organization, but if you're sharing data with someone who's a little, shall we say, lax, it's a chain reaction. Any weak link brings down the whole thing. We really need to be on top of our third-party risk management, making sure everyone's up to par.
No doubt. And then we had Bianlian ransomware hitting Insula Group. You know, an Australian IT services company. I can't help but chuckle a little. A cybersecurity company getting hit by ransomware. It's a bit ironic.
Well, it just goes to show even the cybersecurity pros are targets. And for cyber criminals, IT service providers are high-value targets. Think about it, they have access to multiple client systems. It's like hitting the jackpot.
And speaking of jackpots, Prudential Financial, they had a data breach that kept getting bigger. Initially, they said it was like 36,000 people affected. Then that number jumped to almost 2.6 million. What happened there?
It's not always easy to figure out how big a breach is right away. It takes time, you have to dig deep, but transparency is key, right? The longer a company waits to tell the whole story, the worse it is for their reputation.
Agreed. And we can't forget about the gamers out there. Roll20, that platform for online tabletop RPGs, they had a breach too. Shows you hackers are after any platform with a lot of users. Doesn't matter what industry it is.
Gamers are storing a lot of personal info on these platforms. Credit card details, addresses, it's a goldmine for hackers. Security needs to be a priority, whether you're a bank or a gaming platform.
Totally. Then there was a CDK Global. That attack really threw a wrench in the whole automotive industry. It showed just how vulnerable those digital supply chains are.
Dealerships, repair shops, parts suppliers, everyone felt the impact. Cars are basically computers on wheels these days. More software, more connectivity, more points for hackers to get in.
And let's not forget about state-sponsored espionage. Back in July, 8 nations issued a warning about APT-40. That's a Chinese hacking group, and they're targeting critical infrastructure.
That was a clear signal. Nation-state actors are not slowing down. APT-40, they've been connected to so many attacks, intellectual property theft, going after critical infrastructure, even targeting political groups.
They're pros, well-funded, highly skilled, and they don't give up easily. And they're always coming up with new ways to attack. Makes them really tough to defend against.
It's a constant arms race. July was just the tip of the iceberg, though.
Yeah. It felt like every week there was a new headline. And then August rolled around and things didn't exactly calm down. Right off the bat, we had Microsoft scrambling to patch a zero-click vulnerability. And this one affected all Windows systems with IPv6 enabled.
Zero-day vulnerabilities, those are the scariest. You're basically racing against the clock to fix it before someone exploits it. And this particular vulnerability was in the Windows TCP/IP stack. That's a core part of the operating system. It could allow hackers to take complete control.
And because it hit all Windows systems with IPv6, that's a lot of systems. It's a good reminder to keep those patches up to date, but honestly, patching is always a reactive measure.
You got that right. We got to be more proactive. We need to find and fix these vulnerabilities before the bad guys even know they exist. That means investing in security testing, threat intelligence, vulnerability scanning. We got to be ahead of the curve.
For sure. And then August brought us Salt Typhoon, right? Chinese hackers infiltrating big U.S. internet providers, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile. This was a big deal. National security implications.
This was a major escalation. Getting into those telecom companies, that gives you access to mountains of data. Sensitive communications, metadata, who's talking to who, when, where. The potential for surveillance, for disruption, it's huge.
And these weren't amateurs. They were using custom malware, knew how to hide their tracks. It really exposed some weaknesses in the telecommunications industry. They've always focused on keeping things running smoothly, not so much on cybersecurity.
Exactly. It's a wake-up call for them, that's for sure. And as if that wasn't enough, we had Iranian hackers jump into the mix. APT-42 targeted both the Trump and Harris campaigns, using phishing to try and steal data. It felt like we were in a spy movie.
It really did. Campaigns, they often rely on volunteers, staff who might not be as cybersecurity savvy. That makes them prime targets for phishing and social engineering. And the stakes, they couldn't be higher. Stolen data can derail a campaign, ruin reputations, even sway an election.
It's a huge problem. Political organizations need to step up their cybersecurity game, protect their systems, their data, their communications. The consequences are too great to ignore.
You're telling me. But there was some good news in August, too, right? The U.S. government managed to disrupt a Chinese botnet. That's a whole network of hacked devices, routers, things like that, used to launch attacks.
That was a big win. Botnets, they're a major threat. You can use them for all sorts of nasty stuff. DDoS attacks, sending spam, spreading malware, stealing data. Taking down a botnet, that disrupts those operations and protects potential victims.
It also sends a message. The authorities are out there, they're working to fight back, and they will hold the bad guys accountable.
Absolutely. And let's not forget about the security researchers. Kaspersky, they uncovered a campaign called Do Quixote. This was all about stealing intellectual property, targeting tech and energy companies.
Research like that is vital. It helps us understand what the bad guys are doing, how they're doing it. It helps us stay one step ahead.
Exactly. It helps us build better defenses, protect valuable information, and keep our critical infrastructure safe. Those researchers, they're on the front lines of this battle.
But that Salt Typhoon hack, that was a real game changer. So serious, the White House had to create a whole emergency team to deal with it. That shows you how big of a deal this was.
Yeah, it shows you how seriously they were taking this. It was a recognition that national security was at stake. And it highlights something we've been talking about, how interconnected everything is. You attack one part of critical infrastructure, and it can have a ripple effect across the whole system.
It was a wake-up call, that's for sure. But creating that emergency team, that's a good step. It shows they're taking it seriously. But we need a more coordinated, more comprehensive approach to cybersecurity as a nation. This can't be a one-off thing.
I completely agree. We need a national strategy, something that brings together the government, the private sector, even international partners. We got to be working together on this. And we need to invest in training, in building a workforce that can handle these challenges. The skills gap in cybersecurity, it's a real problem.
You're preaching to the choir here.
Mm.
And remember Delta Airlines. They weren't letting that CrowdStrike outage slide. They took both CrowdStrike and Microsoft to court, wanted at least $500 million in damages.
That case is going to be interesting to watch. It brings up some big questions. When software fails, who pays the price? Who is liable? The company that made the software, the company that uses it. It's a complicated issue, and I think we're going to see more of these cases in the future.
Yeah, as we become more reliant on technology, these questions about liability and accountability, they're only going to get bigger. But the bottom line is, organizations, they need to understand their own responsibility. You can't just outsource security and expect everything to be fine.
You got it. You have to take ownership of your own security posture. August was a wild month, and it really set the tone for the rest of the year. We had everything. 0 days, espionage, ransomware, government takedowns, lawsuits.
It was a lot. And September was like August on steroids.
September felt like the gas pedal got stuck to the floor. Ransomware, data breaches, vulnerabilities everywhere. It was nonstop.
It felt like every time you turned around, there was another headline about some major security incident. It was exhausting.
Yeah, it was a bit overwhelming, to be honest. But hey, let's break it down, see what we can learn from all this mayhem.
Lead the way.
Okay, so remember, Salt Typhoon. Well, those hackers with ties to China's Ministry of State Security, They didn't go away. They kept right on digging into those U.S. internet providers. This wasn't just a smash and grab job. They were playing the long game.
Yeah, slowly infiltrating, getting access to more and more data. It's a reminder that these state-sponsored actors, they're patient, they're strategic, and they have a lot of resources.
They're not going anywhere anytime soon. And they're not the only ones. Remember, the FBI announced they had disrupted another Chinese cyber operation, this one targeting critical U.S. infrastructure. That was a good win for the good guys.
Definitely. It shows that law enforcement agencies are out there, they're working hard, and they're making progress. But it takes a lot of collaboration, sharing information, working together across borders.
You can't fight this alone. We need the FBI, intelligence agencies, private cybersecurity companies, everyone working together. And speaking of big players, remember Microsoft's big announcement, the Secure Future Initiative. They're putting 34,000 engineers on a mission to revamp their security practices.
That's a massive commitment. It shows they're taking this seriously, finally.
Yeah, Microsoft's realizing that they have a huge responsibility here. Their software is everywhere, and they need to make sure it's secure. This is a step in the right direction, but it's just the beginning.
They've got a lot of catching up to do. But while Microsoft was trying to get its house in order, the Ransom Hub group was busy wreaking havoc. They racked up over 200 victims in September alone. They were on a roll.
They were like a well-oiled machine, and it shows how effective this ransomware as a service model is. You don't need to be a coding genius to launch a sophisticated attack anymore. It's a worrying trend.
It's like they've lowered the barrier to entry for cybercrime. So even if big companies like Microsoft are stepping up, there's still so many vulnerable targets out there.
That's right. So what can we do? Well, for starters, we need to get back to basics. Backups, strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, and most importantly, we need to educate people. Teach them about phishing, about social engineering, about all the ways hackers can trick you.
It's all about creating a human firewall, making people aware of the risks. You can have the best technology in the world, but if someone clicks on a malicious link, it can all come crashing down. Speaking of crashing down, remember Charles Darwin's school in the UK? They had to close their doors because of a cyber attack.
It's a shame. Schools and universities, they're becoming prime targets. They don't always have the biggest security budgets, and they're often dealing with outdated systems. Plus, they've got a lot of sensitive data. Student records, financial information, research. It's a recipe for disaster.
We need to do a better job of protecting our educational institutions. They're training the next generation, and we can't afford to let them become breeding grounds for cybercrime.
And it's not just schools. Kadokawa Corporation, the Japanese media giant, they were hit with ransomware too. The Black Suit Group claimed responsibility for that one. It just shows you, these ransomware gangs, they're global, they're fearless, and they'll go after anyone.
They don't care if you're a school, a hospital, or a multinational corporation. If they see a vulnerability, they'll exploit it. And speaking of vulnerabilities, Kawasaki, they had a supply chain attack that really disrupted their European operations.
Ransom Hub, again. It one really showed how interconnected everything is these days. You attack one company and it can ripple through the entire supply chain.
Exactly. You can't just focus on your own security anymore. You have to look at your suppliers, your partners, everyone you do business with. It's a team effort.
It really is. And then there was that vulnerability in the Ivanti Cloud Services appliance. This one allowed for unauthorized administrative access. That means someone could have waltzed right in and taken over.
And because so many organizations use Ivanti products, this was a big deal. It's a good reminder, patching, vulnerability management, those things are crucial. You can't just set it and forget it. You have to stay on top of it.
You're right. Hackers are constantly searching for these vulnerabilities, and it's only a matter of time before they find them. So we have to be faster. We have to find them first.
And even critical infrastructure isn't safe. Transport for London. They had a cyber attack that could expose customer data. London's public transportation system. That's a lot of people's information at risk.
This one's a wake-up call for anyone responsible for critical infrastructure. Transportation, energy, healthcare, these systems are vital, and they're increasingly vulnerable to attack.
We need to be doing everything we can to protect them. And it's not just about the technology, it's about the people. We need trained professionals who know how to defend these systems, and we need to be investing in their education.
It's an investment in our future, really. And to wrap up September, there was a global survey by Yubico, and it found that nearly 45% of employed adults worldwide have been hit by a cyber attack or a scam. That's almost half of us.
It's a sobering statistic. It shows that this is a global problem and it's affecting everyone. We need to do a better job of educating people about the risks.
Cybersecurity awareness, it's crucial. We need to teach people how to protect themselves online, how to spot phishing attempts, how to create strong passwords. Everyone has a role to play in this.
We're all in this together. So September was a tough month. A lot of attacks targeting everyone from schools to hospitals to government agencies. It showed us that a multi-layered approach to cybersecurity is essential.
Technology, processes, and people, we need all three working together if we want to stand a chance.
Absolutely. And as we head into October, the threats only get more sophisticated, more persistent. The stakes keep getting higher.
You can say that again. October was a rough one, with attacks targeting some sensitive areas. Healthcare, law enforcement, even digital heritage. No one is immune, and the consequences are getting more serious.
It felt like every week there was a new attack, a new victim. It was a bit much, to be honest. Where do we even start with October?
Well, the healthcare sector, unfortunately, they continue to be a prime target for ransomware. UMC Health System in Texas, they were hit, and it actually forced them to divert patients. It really highlights how disruptive these attacks can be. It's not just about data anymore, it's about people's lives.
It's scary to think that a cyber attack could actually put people's health at risk. And UMC wasn't the only one. Community Clinic of Maui, they got hit by Lockbit ransomware too. Over 123,000 people had their information exposed. It seems like no healthcare provider is safe, big or small.
The healthcare sector, they're facing a tough challenge. They need to ramp up their cybersecurity, but they're also dealing with tight budgets, and their focus is on patient care. It's a difficult balancing act.
And these ransomware gangs, they're getting so good at what they do. They're organized, they're efficient, and they know how to exploit weaknesses. Healthcare, unfortunately, has a lot of weaknesses.
This is a perfect storm, really. And then you have the Dutch police network breach. All those officers' their contact details compromised. Imagine if that had been operational details, witness information, sensitive investigations. It could have been a disaster.
It just shows you that no one is immune to these attacks. Law enforcement agencies, they rely on technology just like everyone else, and that makes them vulnerable too. And the stakes are incredibly high. It's about public safety, national security.
Exactly. And then Red Barrel Studio, the game developers, they got hacked. Source code stolen, 1.8 terabytes of data gone. That's a huge blow.
For a game developer, source code is like their secret recipe. It's everything. And if it gets stolen, it can be used for piracy, cheating, even creating knockoff games.
It's a reminder that these cybercriminals, they're after more than just money. They want intellectual property, trade secrets, anything they can exploit or sell. And speaking of disruption, MoneyGram had a cyber attack that shut down their systems for a while. Another reminder that financial services are a prime target.
Money transfer services, they handle huge sums of money, and they often serve people who might not be as tech savvy. That makes them vulnerable.
It highlights the need for better security in the financial sector, especially with more and more people relying on digital transactions. These systems need to be bulletproof.
And it wasn't just companies that were targeted. Multiple government websites in Cyprus were attacked. Luckily, those attacks were unsuccessful. But it shows you, no one is safe.
Governments, businesses, individuals were all in the crosshairs. These hackers are constantly scanning, probing, looking for any weakness they can exploit. It's a 24/7 battle.
You're right. You can't afford to be complacent for a second. You have to be proactive, always thinking about security, always looking for ways to improve your defenses.
And then, ironically, the Internet Archives, the organization dedicated to preserving digital history, they got hit with a DDoS attack. Talk about a slap in the face.
It just goes to show, even the organizations that are trying to protect information are vulnerable. And it highlights the importance of redundancy, of having backup systems in place. What if the Wayback Machine had gone down? We could have lost a lot of valuable history.
It's a sobering thought. But there were some good things that happened in October, too. The SEC, they started cracking down on companies that were misleading investors about their cybersecurity practices.
That's a big deal. Transparency is key. Investors need to know what the risks are, and companies shouldn't be allowed to hide security incidents or downplay their severity.
The SEC stepping up like that, that's a good sign. It shows they're taking cybersecurity seriously. And we also saw a bipartisan group of former government officials propose a new cybersecurity plan. That's encouraging, seeing that there's some agreement on this issue.
We need a national strategy, something that everyone can get behind. Cybersecurity isn't a partisan issue, it's a national security issue, and we need to treat it that way.
Absolutely. So October was a mixed bag. Attacks, breaches, but also some positive steps forward. But one thing is clear. The cyber threat is not going away. It's evolving, it's getting more sophisticated, and we need to be ready for it.
No doubt. We can't afford to be complacent. We have to be proactive, we have to be vigilant, and we have to keep learning and adapting. November was no different, really. We saw attacks across all sectors, and the attackers are getting bolder, the stakes are higher.
November felt like we were playing whack-a-mole, with threats popping up faster than we could knock them down.
It was a constant barrage. But let's dive in, take a closer look, see if we can spot any patterns, any lessons learned. Where should we start?
Let's start with iLearning Engines. They're an AI company, and they had $250,000 stolen after a network breach. It's a reminder that even smaller companies, especially those dealing with cutting-edge tech, they're targets now.
Cyber criminals, they go where the money is, and AI, machine learning, that's a hot area right now. Plus, these companies often have valuable intellectual property, algorithms, things like that. It's all worth something on the black market.
Exactly, and it's not just about stealing money. These attacks can disrupt operations, damage reputations, even give competitors an edge. And speaking of disruption, the city of Columbus, Ohio, they got hit with a ransomware attack. The Reseda Group took responsibility for that one, and they claim to have stolen 6.5 terabytes of data. That's a lot of information.
City governments, they're often easy targets. They don't always have the resources or the expertise to defend against these sophisticated attacks. And these ransomware groups, they know that. They're ruthless.
Reseda, they're known for their aggressive tactics. They steal your data, they encrypt your systems, and then they threaten to release everything if you don't pay up. It's a nightmare scenario.
And it's a reminder that cybersecurity is not just a problem for big businesses or government agencies. It affects everyone. Everyone needs to be taking this seriously.
Absolutely. And then you have Schneider Electric, the global energy company. They were targeted by the Hellcat ransomware gang. It shows you that even these huge corporations, they're not immune.
The Hellcat attack, it really highlighted the convergence of IT and OT, operational technology. Industrial systems are becoming more connected, more reliant on software and networks, and that makes them vulnerable.
It's a trend we're seeing across all industries. As everything becomes more digital, the attack surface expands, and the consequences of a cyber attack become more severe.
We need to be thinking about cybersecurity in a holistic way. It's not just about protecting data anymore. It's about protecting critical infrastructure, about protecting people's safety.
I agree. And unfortunately, the healthcare sector, they continue to be a prime target. Memorial Hospital and Manor in Georgia, they were hit with ransomware, and it disrupted access to electronic health records. These attacks, they can literally be a matter of life and death.
It's terrifying. Hospitals are already under so much pressure, and then you add a cyber attack on top of that. It's a recipe for disaster.
The healthcare sector is in a tough spot. They're dealing with legacy systems, interconnected devices, and a lot of sensitive patient data. It's a challenge to secure all of that, especially with limited budgets.
And the energy sector isn't immune either. Newpark Resources, an oil field supplier, they were hit with ransomware too. It's a reminder that these attacks can disrupt critical infrastructure, things that we rely on every day.
Energy production, distribution, transportation, these are all essential services, and they're all becoming more vulnerable to cyber attacks. We need to be investing in their security, making sure they're resilient and able to withstand these attacks.
It's about national security at this point. And speaking of local impact, the city of Sheboygan, Wisconsin, had a cyber attack that caused technology outages and led to a ransom demand. Another example of a local government struggling to cope with these threats.
Local governments, they're often underfunded, understaffed, and they don't always have the expertise they need to deal with cybersecurity. We need to be doing more to support them, to provide them with the resources and the training they need.
They're on the front lines, just like everyone else, and we can't afford to leave them behind. And then we had another supply chain attack. This time it was Blue Yonder, a supply chain technology provider. They were hit with ransomware, and it had a ripple effect on a bunch of major retailers.
It shows you how interconnected the global supply chain is. One weak link, and the whole thing can come crashing down. Organizations need to be thinking about their suppliers, their partners, everyone in their ecosystem.
You have to trust the people you're doing business with. And if you don't trust them, you need to find someone else. And just before Thanksgiving, the city of Hoboken, New Jersey, they got hit with ransomware too. Forced them to shut down government offices.
Talk about bad timing. It's a reminder that these attacks can happen anytime, anywhere, and they can be incredibly disruptive. Local governments, they're often ill-equipped to deal with these situations.
We need to be doing more to prepare them. to help them develop incident response plans to make sure they have the resources to recover quickly.
Absolutely. And let's not forget about the Ransom Hub gang. They were busy too, targeting the city of Coppell, Texas, and the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. These guys are like a machine churning out attacks.
They're relentless, and they're not going away anytime soon.
Yeah.
Organizations need to be aware of them, they need to understand their tactics, and they need to be prepared to defend against them.
And then we had a data breach at France's Ministry of Labor and Employment. That one's a little concerning. Government data is a prime target for hackers, and this breach could potentially impact people looking for jobs.
Governments hold a lot of sensitive information about citizens, businesses, everything. They need to be doing a better job of protecting that data.
Absolutely. They need to be setting an example for everyone else. November was a whirlwind, just like the months before it. It showed us that the threat landscape is constantly evolving and that we need to be constantly adapting.
We can't afford to stand still. We have to be proactive, we have to be vigilant, and we have to be willing to learn from our mistakes.
Well said. And that brings us to December, the final month of what can only be described as a tumultuous year in cybersecurity. A month filled with warnings, bans, and of course more cyber attacks. We saw a shift toward recognizing the need for more proactive security measures and a realization that international cooperation is more crucial than ever.
Yeah, December really hammered home the point that this isn't just a problem for one country or one company or even one industry. This is a global issue, and we need a global response.
You're absolutely right. So let's break down the biggest stories of December, see what we can learn from them.
Okay, right off the bat, we had the FBI and CISA issuing a warning about using SMS for two-factor authentication.
Yeah.
They're saying it's not secure enough anymore, especially with all these SIM swapping attacks going around.
Yeah, SIM swapping, that's where someone tricks your phone company into transferring your number to their SIM card. And once they have your number, they can bypass two-factor authentication. It's a big problem.
So what's the alternative?
Authentication apps, hardware security keys, things like that, they're more secure, but they can be a little bit more of a hassle to use. But hey, security is all about trade-offs, right?
You got it. Convenience versus security, it's a constant battle. And then there was the talk of the U.S. government banning TP-Link routers. National security concerns, they said. Basically, they're worried about Chinese companies having access to sensitive data.
It's a reflection of the growing mistrust between the U.S. and China, especially when it comes to technology. And it's not just TP-Link. There are concerns about other Chinese tech companies as well. It's a tricky situation.
It is. On one hand, you have national security concerns, which are legitimate. But on the other hand, you have the potential for economic disruption, and you have to think about the impact on consumers.
It's a tough balancing act. And then we had the FAA imposing a drone ban over critical sites in New Jersey and New York. It was a 30-day ban prompted by a bunch of unexplained drone sightings. Seems like they're getting pretty concerned about unauthorized drone activity.
Drones, they're becoming more and more sophisticated, more and more accessible, and that makes them a real security threat. They can be used for surveillance, they can be used to disrupt operations, and they can even be used to carry out attacks.
It's a challenge for law enforcement and security agencies. They're still trying to figure out how to deal with this new threat. And it's not just a U.S. problem, it's a global problem. We need to come up with some international regulations, some standards for drone use.
Absolutely. And then we have the Trump transition team raising concerns about the use of private emails and devices. Sounds familiar, right?
Yeah, this brought back memories of the 2016 election and all the controversy over Hillary Clinton's emails. Seems like we haven't learned our lesson. Using personal email accounts for government business, that's just asking for trouble.
It's a security risk, plain and simple. And it can have serious consequences. We need to make sure that our government officials are using secure communication channels, that they understand the importance of cybersecurity.
They need to be setting a good example for everyone else. And finally, we had the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre issuing a pretty stark warning. They're saying that the UK is becoming increasingly vulnerable to cyber attacks, and that the gap between our defenses and the capabilities of our adversaries is widening.
Not good. They specifically called out Russia and China as major threats. These countries, they have sophisticated cyber capabilities, and they're not afraid to use them.
It's a reminder that we're in a constant arms race. We have to be constantly improving our defenses, investing in new technologies, and training our people.
We can't afford to fall behind. Cybersecurity is a national priority, and it needs to be treated that way.
I completely agree. December was a month that really highlighted the need for proactive security measures, international cooperation, and a constant commitment to learning and adapting. We're facing some serious challenges, but we're also seeing some positive steps forward. It's a complex landscape, but we're all in this together.
Well said. It's been a whirlwind tour of the cybersecurity landscape in the second half of 2024, that's for sure. A UK cybersecurity expert avoiding jail time after hacking hunt officials brought up an interesting point, though. Where's the line between ethical hacking and vigilantism? It feels like a gray area, especially when it comes to exposing illegal activities.
It is, yeah. It's a tough one, for sure. You've got someone using their skills to expose something wrong, but they're also taking the law into their own hands, right? It raises some questions about, due process and what if someone misuses that power? Do the ends justify the means? It's a big debate.
It really is. And speaking of things that spark debate, remember that Krispy Kreme cyber attack. Might seem kind of small potatoes, but it disrupted their online ordering. And it kind of highlights how much we rely on digital stuff for even the simplest things.
It was a reminder for businesses, all businesses. Big, small, doesn't matter. Cyber criminals, they're not picky. You got to have some basic security in place or you're going to be a target. Protect your systems, protect your customers.
And it's not just about losing money, right? A cyber attack can really hurt your reputation, make people lose trust in your brand. That can have long-term effects.
Absolutely. But hey, it wasn't all bad news in December. Okta, the identity and access management company, they had some really good earnings, better than expected. It kind of shows that the cybersecurity industry, it's still going strong even with all the craziness.
Maybe because of all the craziness.
Yeah.
Companies are realizing they got to step up their game, invest in security, and that's good news for the companies providing the solutions.
Exactly. The threats are getting more advanced, so the solutions have to get more advanced too. It's a constant evolution. Speaking of evolving threats, Salt Typhoon, that hacking campaign we talked about, well, it kept going. They found evidence of compromised telecoms infrastructure in dozens of countries. This thing was huge.
It shows you the reach of these state-sponsored hackers. They're not just targeting one country, they're going global. And it also shows how sophisticated they are, how patient they are. This was a long-term operation, carefully planned and executed.
And it really drives home the point that we need international cooperation to fight this. One country can't do it alone. We need to share information, coordinate our defenses, work together.
We're all in the same boat, right? And speaking of things that keep coming back, the FAA, they had to impose another 30-day drone ban over those same critical sites in New Jersey and New York. More unexplained sightings. It seems like they're just scratching their heads at this point.
Drones are a tough nut to crack from a security perspective. They're small, they're hard to track, and the technology is changing so quickly, it's hard to keep up.
Every time we come up with a solution, it feels like the drones are one step ahead.
Exactly. And then there was that whole thing with the Trump transition team and their use of private emails and devices. It felt like deja vu going back to 2016 and the Hillary Clinton email situation.
You'd think we'd have learned by now, wouldn't you? Using personal email for government business, that's just a bad idea. It's a security risk, plain and simple.
And it can have serious consequences. We saw that in 2016, and we could see it again. We need to make sure our government officials are using secure channels, following best practices. The stakes are too high to be careless.
Absolutely. And to wrap things up for December, the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre, they issued a pretty grim warning. They're saying the UK is becoming more vulnerable to cyber attacks, that the bad guys are pulling ahead in this arms race.
They specifically called out Russia and China as major threats. And they're not wrong. Those countries have invested heavily in their cyber capabilities, and they're not afraid to use them. Whether it's espionage, disruption, or outright attacks, they're a force to be reckoned with.
It's a wake-up call for the UK. And really for any country that thinks it's immune to these threats. We need to be investing in our defenses, in our people, in our technology. We need to be proactive, not reactive. That whole case with this cybersecurity expert in the UK, the one who hacked those hunt officials, it really makes you think, where do you draw the line? When is hacking okay, even if it's for a good cause?
It's a tough question. I mean, he exposed some illegal activity, but he also broke the law. It opens up a can of worms, What if everyone starts taking the law into their own hands? Where does it end?
It's definitely something to think about. And speaking of things that make you think, remember that Krispy Kreme cyber attack? It might seem kind of funny, but it disrupted their online ordering. And it shows how vulnerable even those everyday services are.
It was a wake-up call for a lot of smaller businesses, I think. They might think they're too small to be a target, but that's not true. Cyber criminals, they're opportunistic, so they'll go after anyone they think they can exploit.
And the damage can be real. It's not just about money, it's about reputation, customer trust. A cyber attack can really set a business back.
Absolutely. But hey, not everything was doom and gloom in December. Okta, the identity and access management company, they had a pretty good quarter, exceeded their earnings expectations. It shows that the cybersecurity industry is still going strong.
Yeah, I guess you could say it's a growth industry. As the threats increase, so does the demand for security solutions. It's a silver lining, I suppose.
It is. But let's not get too comfortable. Remember Salt Typhoon, that hacking campaign we've been talking about? Well, in December, it came out that they had compromised telecoms infrastructure in dozens of countries. This was a massive operation.
It was a global espionage campaign, really. And it shows just how serious these state-sponsored actors are. They have the resources, the expertise, and the patience to carry out these long-term, sophisticated attacks.
It's a whole different level of threat, and it's not something that any one country can deal with on its own. We need international cooperation, information sharing, coordinated defenses. We have to work together if we want to stand a chance.
We're all in this together, that's for sure. And speaking of things that keep happening, the FAA had to impose another 30-day drone ban over those critical sites in New Jersey and New York. More unexplained sightings. It seems like they're having a tough time figuring out how to deal with this.
Drones are a real challenge from a security perspective. They're hard to detect, hard to track, and the technology is constantly evolving. It's a moving target.
It's like trying to hit a fly with a hammer. You can swing all you want, but you're probably going to miss.
Yeah, it's tough. And then, to top it all off, we had the Trump transition team raising concerns about the use of private emails and devices. It felt like we were back in 2016, reliving the Hillary Clinton email saga.
You'd think we'd have learned our lesson by now. Using personal email for government business, that's just a recipe for disaster.
It's a security nightmare, and it can have real consequences. We need to make sure that our government officials are using secure communication channels, that they understand the importance of cybersecurity. It's not just about protecting data, it's about protecting national security.
Well said. And finally, the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre, they issued a pretty dire warning about the country's vulnerability to cyber attacks. They said the gap between our defenses and the capabilities of our adversaries is growing, and they specifically called out Russia and China as major threats.
Those countries, they've been investing heavily in their cyber warfare capabilities, and they're not afraid to use them. It's a wake-up call for the UK, and really for any country that thinks it's immune to these threats. We need to be stepping up our game.
We need to be investing in cybersecurity education, in workforce development, in new technologies. We need to be proactive, not reactive. We need to be thinking ahead, anticipating the next move, and preparing for the worst.
Absolutely. Cybersecurity is an ongoing battle, and it's a battle we can't afford to lose. The stakes are too high. So, as we wrap up our look at the cybersecurity landscape in the second half of 2024, it's clear that we're facing some serious challenges, but we're also seeing some progress. There's more awareness, more investment, more collaboration.
We're starting to take this threat seriously, and that's a good thing. But we can't let up. We have to keep pushing, keep learning, keep innovating.
We have to remember that cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. It's not just the IT department's problem. It's something that we all need to be thinking about every day.
Absolutely. And that's where Cybersecurity HQ comes in. We're your hub for all things cybersecurity. Jobs, reports, breaking news, and our weekly newsletter read by over 70,000 professionals. We're here to help you stay informed, stay ahead of the curve, and stay safe.
So until next time, stay vigilant and keep those defenses strong.